All right, Broncos country, welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be going over my thoughts of the Denver Broncos preseason game week 1 versus the San Francisco 49ers and preseason game week 2 versus the Arizona Cardinals. So if you do enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below, as the support is greatly appreciated. And let's go ahead and let's jump straight into this video. So in this video, we're going to be going over my overall thoughts of each preseason game. And this isn't going to be including the starters, but I am going to rank my top 5 players with 2 honorable mentions. So I guess top 7 players for each game. And these are just going to be my opinions based on what I saw and what I thought each player did, right? So it's going to be my opinion, what I thought was the best 5 players in my opinion. So that's what we're going to do. But yeah, we're not going to include the starters, as I mentioned, because it's going to be too small of a sample size. And anything I have to say about the starters is going to be a little bit of an overreaction, as I'm going to go ahead and grab my notes right here for each player that I wrote down. But basically, going over my initial thoughts for the starters in this first game, I thought they looked really rusty, right? Bo made some nice completions, but some passes were a little bit high, and it didn't really look like he had that rhythm, right? Just knocking off the rust before jumping into an actual game. So that's my opinion on the starters there. In terms of the rookie class, my only notable notes were Jeremy Crawshaw. I was really disappointed in, because I am a big believer in Jeremy Crawshaw, and it's sad to see the fan base already turning on him. That's one of the most toxic things about this fan base, is we'll turn on a player like that. But I still believe in Jeremy Crawshaw. And then the other thing is Caleb Lohner looks... I don't think he's going to make the roster at this point, but we'll have to see what happens. But that's kind of my initial thoughts on the game. Now let's go ahead. Let's jump into my top performers. So starting off with my first honorable mention, we have Corinne Reed, who had 2 tackles and an interception, and that's why he is getting on here today, because of that interception. Now, granted, it was pretty much thrown right at him, but what are you going to do? Drop the interception, not pick it off? No, you're going to make a play, and, he took advantage of the opportunity. He picked off, I can't remember, what was it, like Mordecai? Was that their quarterback? I can't remember who was in. I think it was started with an M. But he did pick him off, and, he looked solid, the undrafted free agent linebacker out of Utah. And it's interesting because I do think the linebacker position is wide open, right? You have Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton as your starters, but they're both coming off of injuries. Drew Sanders has a pretty big injury history. I think he's injured right now. And then you got Justin Strnad, and then who else? You got Lavelle Bailey, Corinne Reed, J.B. Brown. There's a bunch of guys competing for depth spots at the inside linebacker position. That's the most open spot on this roster, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Another spot that I think is open is the tight end position, and Caden Prescorn had a pretty solid game. Mostly it came towards the end of the game on a pass from Sam Ehlinger, but Prescorn had one reception for 7 yards and a touchdown, as I mentioned, from Sam Ehlinger late in the game. And I decided to give him an honorable mention here because I'm interested to see what's going to happen at the tight end position. Obviously, Evan Ingram's a lock to be the starter, but he's pretty much another receiver out there. So in terms of inline tight end, you're going to have Adam Troutman. And then who's going to make it after him? Is it going to be a Nate Adkins? Is it going to be a Lucas Krull? Is it going to be Caden Prescorn? Is it going to be a Thomas Yasmin? Is it going to be Caleb Lohner? It's interesting to see what's going to be happening there. So I decided to give Caden Prescorn another honorable mention. But then jumping into my top 5 players, and I'm going to try to make this go really quickly so we're not sitting here for a long time. I'm going to try and move and talk as fast as possible while getting all my points across. But my number 5 player is going to be Tyler Beatty, or I guess Bidet, who had 5 carries for 32 yards, averaging 6.4 yards per carry, and had 2 receptions for 9 yards. He just looked really explosive, and he looked like he's ready to go. Obviously had that scary injury last season, but bounced back and looks really solid in the preseason, and someone who I think could make that running back 3, running back 4 spot behind J.K. Dobbins, behind Evan Ingram, and then I think the Broncos most likely carry 4 running backs on the roster. So I think Dobbins and Harvey are locks, and then who are going to be the two behind them. And another guy is Blake Watson, who was an undrafted free agent last year, who I was super high on. Was on the practice squad, but was elevated to the active roster for a couple of games. And in preseason week 1, Blake Watson had 4 carries for 28 yards, averaged 7 yards per carry, and had 3 receptions for 21 yards as well. Again, looked really explosive and looked like he's ready to go. And so it's going to be a hard-fought battle at that running back position, right? Because, as I mentioned, J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, those are the starters. And let's say we do carry a maximum of 4 running backs. You got 2 spots to split between Tyler Bidet, Blake Watson, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime. Those 4 running backs. 2 of them are going to get cut at least, and potentially more, depending on what Sean Payton wants to do with his roster. So that's going to be very interesting to see. But I thought Blake Watson looked really phenomenal in preseason week 1. And you could honestly flip Beatty and Watson, because to me they had pretty similar performances, but they were both really, really solid. Then moving on to my number 3 player is Chris Abrams-Strain, who didn't light up the stat sheet, but that's okay because I'm doing what I'm evaluating based off my eyes. And I think Chris Abrams-Strain, it's kind of criminal that he's number 3. He could be even higher, but did have 1 tackle. But the thing I thought about Chris Abrams-Strain is he looks like he's ready to go. He deserves a spot to start, and he could actually start a lot, because with Vance Joseph, we're going to run a lot of dime packages. We're going to have a lot of extra defensive backs out on the field. So it's going to be Surtain and Riley Moss as the starting corners. Then you're going to have Jade Barron, Jaquan McMillan, Chris Abrams-Strain as the nickel guy. So it'll be interesting to see, but Chris Harris Jr. tweeted out, I think during the game or after the game, that it's going to be hard to keep Chris Abrams-Strain off the field because of how impressive he looks, right? Filled in as a rookie, it looked pretty solid, right? Came in relief of Levi Wallace and was an instant upgrade. I thought Chris Abrams-Strain performed really, really well in the preseason week 1, and I think he is pushing to potentially be a starting corner for the Broncos. That's how much I believe in Chris Abrams-Strain, and that's how much of an important piece I think Abrams-Strain will be to this roster. But my number 2 guy is going to be Trent Sherfield. I thought he looked phenomenal, right? Brought in as a special teams guy, right? Going to be a second returner if you need him. Going to be a gunner if you need him. Going to be a special teams player. But he made a performance, and he showed out on offense, right? He had 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. And that touchdown was a very impressive touchdown. Time was winding down in the first half. Jarrett Stidham threw it down the right sideline, and Sherfield had to make a toe tap catch. And he comes down with the football. Both feet were in bounds, and he secures a touchdown on a very impressive catch. I thought Sherfield looked phenomenal. Again, it's preseason, so we can't overreact to any of this stuff, but it's fun to talk about and just kind of fun to give my top performers. But Trent Sherfield, I was really impressed by in preseason week 1. And then my number 1 performer, I don't think it should be any surprise to anybody, but it's going to be quarterback Jarrett Stidham, who had 14 completions on 15 attempts, only missed 1 pass there, obviously. He threw for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, not a full game. He looked really, really phenomenal. In my opinion, Jarrett Stidham is one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. I think he's someone who can start games if you need him to. You probably don't want him starting a full season. He's kind of on that fence of being a fringe starter and a really, really solid backup. And the Broncos were lucky to have him as our backup quarterback. To me, Stidham looked phenomenal in preseason week 1 versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, flipping the page, we have preseason week 2. Going over my initial thoughts, the starters didn't play for the most part. Obviously, Evan Ingram was in there, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But starters weren't in here. But even if they were playing, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not including starters in my top 5 because it's preseason. We're going to overreact. We're going to say a bunch of stuff, and it's preseason. We got to calm down. Remember, none of it matters. This is just for trying out stuff. It's for players trying to make the roster, right? So it's an audition for players who are bubble players on the roster who are trying out not only for the team they're on, but for other teams as well. In terms of the rookies, we'll get to some of them later. But I really liked what I saw from Jeremy Crawshaw. He improved his punting, right? Improved the net punts. The first punt was, it was better, but still not great. And the second one, he booted it, but it went out of the back of the end zone for a touchback. So there is improvement. I still believe in Crawshaw, but whoa. Accidentally bumped my desk. I'm sorry about that, but I still believe in Crawshaw, and I think he still has a lot of upside. I do believe in Crawshaw. I know a lot of Broncos fans are frustrated and have given up on him. I think that's a little hasty to do already, but I still believe in Crawshaw. However, Caleb Lohner, I don't know if I can say the same thing, and maybe that's me being hypocritical, saying it's a little hasty to give up on Crawshaw, but yeah, I don't know. Caleb Lohner, I think, needs to make a big impact here in preseason, week 3, and in the training camp practices if he wants to make the roster. But hey, we'll have to see how things go. In terms of the other rookies, let's talk about the first drive. The Cardinals punted, and we start on our own 3-yard line. The first play is a little screen pass to R.J. Harvey, but he was pretty much hit immediately as he got the pass. So it goes to 2nd and 8. Then Jarrett Stidham on a boot finds Evan Ingram for a big pickup down the right sideline. I think it was like 50, 60 yards. The next play, Stidham finds Pat Bryant for a big pickup of 20 yards, putting us in the red zone. And then it's a handoff to R.J. Harvey, who finds a very small hole and navigates his way in for a touchdown. So very solid start from the starters. The only real starter out there was Evan Ingram and potentially R.J. Harvey, depending on how that running back depth chart breaks down. But really solid start for the Denver Broncos in their opening drive against the Arizona Cardinals. Then, moving on to my top performers, I'm putting Jahdae Barron as an honorable mention. Had 3 tackles, 1 assist, and you could even put him higher, right? Because anytime you don't hear a corner's name, it's pretty much a good thing. It's meaning they're covering on defense. They're not giving up a whole lot of completions, right? They're not getting picked on. So anytime you don't hear a name, it's typically good. Of course, you would love to hear you want to hear their name for interceptions and stuff, but if you don't hear their name, it's really a good thing. And Jahdae Barron has been playing really solid, right, in terms of coverage and everything else. But I think the most notable thing is his tackling ability. He's not afraid to go up and hit and make contact and tackle players to the ground, right? So to me, that's the big standout for Jahdae Barron, and still, I do believe he is competing for a starting corner role. It'll be interesting to see, though, because I think Barron, McMillan, and Chris Abrams-Drain, they're all competing for that starting nickel spot, and we'll have to see who ends up winning it at the end of the preseason and after final cutdowns and everything goes on. It'll be interesting to see in that area. And then my other honorable mention is going to be Lavelle Bailey, who had 3 tackles and 3 solo tackles, 2 assist tackles, 5 total tackles. And as I mentioned with Corinne Reed in the preseason week 1, I do think that inside linebacker, as a Mike linebacker, off-ball linebacker, I do believe that position is open for grabs, right? You're going to have Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton as the starter, but they're both coming off of injuries, so we'll have to see what happens when the regular season gets here. And then you have Drew Sanders, who's injured. You have Justin Strnad, the vet. But then after that, who do you keep? How many are you going to keep? Typically, I think we keep 4, but you could keep 5 depending on the injury, what's happening with Drew Sanders, right? Lavelle Bailey could easily make the opening day roster. He actually made the final 53 last year. And then after like a day or so later, he was cut and moved to the practice squad to make room for somebody else. So could he do it again and this time stick? We'll have to see. I believe he can. But I do think that off-ball linebacker is a very poachable position, as I mentioned earlier, for the Denver Broncos. And not in terms of the starters, right? I think Dre Greenlaw, I mean, he's your most talented off-ball linebacker, right? Just is coming off of that big injury and is still healing and getting ready for the regular season. But I do think he could challenge for a depth piece as an off-ball linebacker. Then my number 5 player is going to be Jaleel McLaughlin, and you guys know, if you've been watching the videos this offseason, I have been a big advocate for Audric Estime, but with the way Blake Watson, Tyler Bidet, Jaleel McLaughlin, J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey have been performing, I think Audric Estime is going to be cut. I don't think he makes the active roster based on the things we've seen right now. I could be wrong, and I hope for Estime's sake he makes it. But just with the other running backs in the room and how they've been performing so far, I think it's going to be very tough. But moving on to Jaleel McLaughlin, who is my number 5 player. He had 3 carries for 48 yards, averaging 16 yards per carry. Looked really solid for the Denver Broncos. Again, he was arguably running back 1 last year, right? Javonte Williams struggled, wasn't the same. Audric Estime, was shaky, fumbled, wasn't the most explosive guy. Obviously, that's not his game, but you could argue that Jaleel McLaughlin was the RB1 for the Broncos, and, maybe as an RB3 and RB4, that's a better role for him, but he looked very impressive here in the preseason. So Jaleel McLaughlin is my number 5 player here in preseason week 2. Number 4, you could absolutely have him higher. I'm moving him down the list just because I want to give other players a chance to shine in the top 3. But it's Jarrett Stidham, who looked phenomenal again in preseason week 2. Again, I think he's one of the best backups, if not the best backup quarterback in the entire NFL. Had 16 completions on 23 attempts for 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Jarrett Stidham was balling. Again, Stidham, one of, if not the best backup quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and is a guy who can come in and start 1 or 2 games if you need to, if your starter gets injured or whatnot. But, fringe starter, don't necessarily think you want him starting for a full season. But, yeah, really like Jarrett Stidham. Think he's been balling in preseason, as many of you guys probably have been thinking that as well. But Stidham, my number 4 player. And then at number 13, jeez. Number 3, it is going to be Courtney Jackson, an undrafted free agent wide receiver who in this game had 2 receptions for 32 yards, 1 carry on a jet sweep that went for 30 yards, and then where he's been making an impact has been in the returning game where he returned, what was it? I don't think it was one of kickoffs or punts. It wasn't both. I think it was punts, but he had 3 returns for 43 yards and averaged 14.3 yards per return. So I've been impressed by Courtney Jackson. In week 1, did have a fumble, which did keep him off the list for me. But I do think he's been having a really solid preseason, and he's someone who I think could make the active roster and could continue that streak of an undrafted free agent making it every year. I think Courtney Jackson has the opportunity to be that guy for the Denver Broncos. And then moving on to number 2, it is Pat Bryant. And to me, Pat Bryant is someone who I've been underestimating. He's a player I liked coming out of Illinois, but I thought it was early in the 3rd round. But with how he's been balling in training camp and in the preseason games, clearly I've been wrong about him. And I think he's looked really, really solid last week. Or I guess in the game versus the Cardinals, he had 4 receptions for 70 yards, and he just looks like a big, reliable target who you could find downfield, a very sure-handed guy, going to be a guy who goes up and gets jump balls. I think Pat Bryant has looked phenomenal in the orange and blue thus far. And then finally, my number 1 player, I don't think this should be any surprise from anybody. It is Troy Franklin. And someone who I also believed in last year and still believe in, right? So you got Estime and Franklin. And Franklin, he is exceeding those expectations and he is hitting that ceiling, right? Had 4 receptions for 67 yards, 2 touchdowns. That first touchdown down the left sideline just beat zone coverage for an easy touchdown. And his second touchdown was a great contested catch, right? Not putting his hands up too early to give time for the defender to turn his head, but being able to go up at the last second, the football down in a contested catch area. I think it looks very phenomenal, and I think Troy Franklin, he's going to have a breakout season, right? The big thing with Franklin last year was a little bit of his route running. I don't think his route running was phenomenal last year, but it was the drops. It was the drops on those deep balls, right, drop multiple balls when targeted deep, and he's been improving on that. So Troy Franklin with a big leap coming this year, and he was phenomenal in preseason game week 2. Again, 4 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns for Troy Franklin. It'll be interesting to see where he lines up for the Broncos. Is he going to be the starting slot receiver? What's going to happen with Devon Vele? It's going to be interesting to see how this receiver room shakes out. But that is my video here for the first 2 weeks of the preseason. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on your top performers. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below, as the support is greatly appreciated. Yeah, I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. I'm going to have one more Final 53 roster prediction for the Broncos. I have another video coming out on the top 10 most underrated Broncos, in my opinion. And then we're also going to have a way too early 2026 mock draft, because I promised you guys that after the 2025 draft, and I haven't delivered yet. So going to probably do that, target a release after the 3rd preseason game, just kind of in that dead week before the regular season starts. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as the support is greatly appreciated. My name is Parker. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.